I remember the day she stood bound before the town, not for a crime, but for the silence of her womb. The sun was low, bleeding gold across the dust, and the air was sharp with the musk of horses and the dry rasp of rope against skin. Clara May Sutton stood barefoot on the wooden platform, her dress torn at the hem, her wrists tied at her sides. She held her chin high, though her eyes betrayed her, glassy with a shame she could not hide. The people gathered like vultures, their voices sharp, carrying through the dusk. "She's barren," someone hissed. "A waste of a woman. Pretty face, but no seed." Coins rattled in pockets, the crowd restless for spectacle more than purchase. The sheriff, Abel Crowley, looked her over like a cow at market, his voice booming without mercy. He called her name as though it weren't a name at all, but a mark of failure. Dust swirled with each stomp of a boot, and the heat pressed heavy, baking her humiliation into her skin. She said nothing. Her silence was both shield and wound. But she could not block the whispers, the mothers clutching their children tighter, the men spitting tobacco, the young girls watching with wide, fearful eyes. Clara May knew what they all saw, a woman without use. And then he stepped forward. Jonah Callahan, a rancher, broad-shouldered, his shirt rolled to the elbows, the smell of leather and earth about him. But it was not his presence that hushed the crowd. It was the small child asleep against his chest, wrapped in linen. A girl, no more than 6 months old, her breath soft as the wind. Jonah walked through the murmurs and the stairs, coins heavy in his hand. He laid them in the sheriff's palm, his jaw tight, eyes steady. No words of bargain, no swagger of ownership. Just the clink of silver and a silence that seemed heavier than Crowley's voice had ever been. The crowd erupted in whispers. Why would he pay for her? He's already got a child. Fool man, wasting good coin. Clara dared to lift her eyes, and she saw him not looking at her, but at the rope around her waist. Jonah cut himself, the fibers snapping, his hand deliberate but gentle. For a moment, she stood stunned, unbound yet feeling more naked than before. His gaze flickered. Not pity, not hunger, something else she could not name. When he turned, he shifted the baby higher against his arm, offering Clara a no explanation, only a space beside him. She followed, because where else could she go? The ride back was quiet, save for the baby's soft fussing. The land stretched endless, dry earth giving way to grass, the sky burning orange into indigo. Jonah did not fill the silence with questions or commands. His stillness unsettled her more than cruelty would have. She sat stiff in the saddle, her hands raw from the rope's bite, her heart knocking like a caged bird. When the ranch finally rose out of the dusk, a spread of barns, a weathered house, fences stretching to the horizon, it looked less like salvation than exile. Jonah dismounted, took the baby in one arm, and gestured toward the house. No words, just the quiet expectation that she would follow. Inside, life was plain. Worn wood floors, the smell of hay drifting in through open shutters, a rocking chair set near the fire. Jonah said little as he handed her cloth to mend, a skillet to tend, a cradle to rock. It was not ownership, but it was not freedom either. He moved like a man carrying grief in every muscle, each task precise, his eyes never asking more of her than silence. At night, Clara lay on a narrow cot, the house breathing with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. She heard the baby cry, the little girl's wails cutting through the dark. Each time, she rose without thinking, cradling the child in her arms, whispering lullabies she had not sung in years. Songs her own mother once crooned in a far-off childhood. Her voice trembled, but the baby quieted, her tiny fists curling into Clara's dress. And in the doorway, Jonah sometimes stood unseen, watching, his face unreadable in the dim light. Days bled into weeks. Clara tended to the ranch in silence, mending Jonah's shirts, washing the dust from Mary Beth's hair, feeding chickens in the crisp dawn. She found herself humming when she thought no one was near, her voice weaving through the rooms. Yet every kindness she offered was shadowed by the thought that she was replaceable, unwanted, a woman bought not for who she was but for what she could not give. Still, when Mary Beth's hand clung tight to her finger, or when the baby's laugh rose sudden and bright in the quiet kitchen, Clara felt something stir inside her, a warmth she thought long buried. And at night, standing at the window with the child in her arms, she wondered not why Jonah had paid for her, but why, despite everything, she was beginning to feel the faint ache of belonging. The seasons turned slowly on the prairie, the wind carrying dust in summer, frost in winter, and the cries of meadowlarks each spring. Clara moved through the days like a shadow stitched into the rhythm of the Callahan Ranch. In town, the whispers followed her. At the mercantile, at the church steps, outside the blacksmith's forge, she felt the sting of eyes on her back. "That's the barren widow," they said under their breath. "Jonah bought her same as cattle. She'll never give him what he wants." Each word was a thorn, but Clara did not bow her head. She kept her hand steady on the basket, her eyes fixed ahead. And when Mary Beth reached out her little arms and clutched at Clara's dress, the gossip dulled, just a little. A child does not ask where love comes from, only that it is given. Jonah rarely spoke of feelings, but his silence softened over time. He fixed her boots when the soles began to peel, leaving them by the door without a word. Clara, in turn, left coffee steaming on the porch rail where he saddled his horse each morning. Their exchanges were not conversations, but offerings, quiet tokens that filled the space between loneliness and trust. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains, wild with lightning. The wind clawed at the barn doors, threatening to tear them loose. Clara ran out barefoot into the rain, skirts plastered against her legs, rope in hand. Jonah was already there, bracing the doors against the gale. Their hands brushed as they pulled together, knuckles raw, hair slicked with rain. For a moment, the world was nothing but thunder and the sudden, sharp heat of their touch. When the storm passed, they stood breathless in the doorway, eyes lingering too long, words locked behind their teeth. But Clara told herself it was only duty. He kept her for the baby's sake, nothing more. The town's cruelty proved harder to withstand than the storm. One Sunday after service, as the congregation spilled onto the dirt road, Martha Hensley, sharp-tongued and cruel-eyed, stepped close enough for Clara to smell the sourness of her breath. "An empty cradle," she hissed. "That's all you are." Jonah could have had a real woman, but he settled for wasted ground. The words split Clara open. She walked quickly away, her vision blurred, her hands trembling as she reached the hitching post. She did not hear Jonah follow until his shadow fell beside hers. His face was carved in silence, his jaw set so hard it looked like stone. On the ride home, he gripped the reins with a fury that needed no words. That night, when Mary Beth was asleep, Clara sat by the fire, the sting of Martha's words still burning. Jonah stood across the room, his hands resting on the mantel. At last he spoke, his voice low, rough as gravel. "My wife died giving birth to Mary Beth," he said. "She was strong, but the child took her breath, left me with only silence in this house. When I saw you on that platform, Clara, I didn't see barrenness. I saw someone still, standing while the world tried to grind her into dust. I didn't need a womb. I needed someone who knew what it meant to endure." Clara's tears fell quiet, more from release than sorrow. For the first time, she looked at him not as a master or savior, but as a man marked by grief, searching for strength in another. The night the intruder came tested all of that. A drunken ranch hand from a neighboring spread staggered onto their land, his laughter mean, his breath reeking of whiskey. He pounded on the door, calling Clara a broken mare, mocking Jonah for wasting his coin on her. He tried to drag her out by the arm, jeering that he'd show her what a real man wanted. Jonah came down on him with fists like iron, the two men crashing into the dirt, the baby crying from the cradle upstairs. Clara's heart thundered in her chest, fear twisting into something fiercer. She lifted Mary Beth in her arms, then stepped into the doorway, rifle clutched tight in her free hand. Her voice shook at first, then steadied like steel. "You'll leave this place now," she told the man, her eyes locked on his. "And if you ever set foot here again, I'll make sure the ground keeps you." The ranch hand spat blood into the dirt and stumbled off into the dark, shame clinging to him heavier than whiskey. Jonah rose from the fight bruised and breathless, his shirt torn. He looked at Clara then, not as a purchase, not as pity, but as the unshakable heart of his home. At dawn, They sat together on the porch. The horizon burned with pink and gold, the baby asleep against Clara's chest. The quiet stretched between them, but it was no longer hollow. Jonah's voice, when it came, was softer than she had ever heard. "Thank you," he said. "Not for cooking, not for mending, not for enduring, but for giving Mary Beth a mother's tenderness, and him a reason to believe in something beyond loss." Clara closed her eyes against the rising sun, her heart easing into a rhythm she thought she had lost forever. She was not barren, not here, not now. She was a garden of resilience, her worth found not in what she could give, but in how she could love. And as the narrator's voice closes, the desert does not remember the cruel words of men. It remembers the small mercies, the lullabies in the dark, the storm faced hand in hand, the courage to stand when others would bow. If you listen close, you'll hear it still. Even a barren heart can bloom when it is seen with gentle eyes.